please come down for some presentation. Don't fly right here. All right, what's up, everybody? Thank you for coming to Boston Indies. Normally, I have my notebook, which tells me what I'm supposed to say right now, but my cat peed on it, so we're just gonna figure it out. Thank you for coming to Boston Indies. Boston Indies is Boston's home for independent games, I guess. We're trying to create a, of course, safe and welcoming environment here. By attending this event, you agree to adhere to the MIT Code of Conduct. So if anyone harasses you, you experience any unwelcome behavior, etc., please come talk to either myself or Rick over here, who's our MIT host. We're going to do announcements in just a second, so if folks have anything to announce, please come line up over here, whether that's an event that is upcoming that you're running or participating in or whatever. If you have a game that is coming out you want to hype up, if you are hiring for a job. Anybody? Nobody has an event? Yeah, come on. I know you got one. What else? Okay, so while we're killing time for Jay to walk up here, Boston Indies is running an event next month, November 18th, legal issues in game development. We're going to have a few lawyers from the Holland and Knight firm who help us establish the Boston Game Dev nonprofit. They're going to be talking about legal issues in game development. If you have any questions about, they're going to be taking questions, so if you have specific questions about employment contracts, starting a studio, corporation types, IP law, like whether you should be trademarking or copyrighting anything in your game or your company logo or anything like that. Free legal advice is not easy to come by, so I highly recommend coming to that and chit-chatting with some lawyers. We run coffee hours every Friday morning at 8:30 on Zoom. Chris in the back is one of our rotating hosts. What's today? It's Monday. 4 days from now, right? The link for that goes up on the Slack, which is at slack.bostongamedev.com.org. It's one of them. You can try those. What else? Follow Boston Indies on all the, I don't know, some of the socials. We're not on anything these days, there's too many. At Boston Indies, I think that's it. Am I forgetting anything? Anybody know? That seems right. All right, Jay, what's up?
Yep. So Boston Fig is coming back in person after 5 long years. And it will be in Cyclorama in Boston on December 15th. Plus, our game submission deadlines have been extended for another week. So we have 1 more week to submit any digital game submissions, tabletop game submissions, on October 27th.
Also, Game Audio Boston is going to be on October 29th. I think that's a Zoom thing. Or it's probably on Discord. Anyway, it's on the meetup page, which I probably also should have mentioned, meetup.com/BostonGameDev. Check it out. Come to our stuff. It's pretty good. I think that's going to do it for us. Brian, you ready?
I'm ready.
Got a great speaker for you tonight, Ryan Canuel from Petricore Games. And do you need this mic? Do you need this mic?
I'm already good. Awesome. Well, hi everyone. First off, thanks for coming out on a Monday night for this. I really appreciate it. So yeah, I'm Ryan. I run Petricore. I'm going to spend a little time just going over us and our history. But primarily what I want to talk about tonight is indies and emerging platforms, and both our journey as a studio at Petricore, what led us to pivot from doing traditionally mobile and PC Steam games to more of an XR focus, and why I think indie devs should be looking at, this isn't XR specific, but just new platforms in general in emerging markets. So a little bit of an introduction for me and Petricore. So I went to Becker College, which actually no longer exists, and in Worcester, Massachusetts. And while I was there, I took part, there's this organization that still exists in some form called MassDigi. They ran this internship over the summer, and I was able to take part in that and meet several of the people I actually ended up starting Petricore with. It was an awesome program. MassDigi did a lot and continues to do a lot. And it was great for us. From there, when I was in their program, I met Monty Sharma, and he was a serial entrepreneur. He helped run a lot of what they were doing. And he was the one who encouraged, as I was talking to him, hey, you should start your own studio, which wasn't something that I'd considered at all. I was still in school. But his advice was, hey, like, you have very little to lose. You don't own a house, you don't have a family and kids. No one's really going to come after you if this doesn't go well. And I was like, well, that's actually a good idea. The pitch was, let's give it a year and see how it goes. And if it doesn't work out, we can all go find jobs, probably better jobs than we would have gotten if we hadn't tried to do it. So alongside that, I was an adjunct at Becker from 2016 to 2018. And funny enough, the class had an XR focus to it. We were working on a video game opera and did XR apps as a part of it. And Petricore, currently, we're a team of 9, and we do a mix of original IP and client work. And the balance of that shifted a lot over the years, but actually now we're probably a little more weighted in the original work than the client work at this time, which has been rare for us as a studio. It's always been very heavy client work. So it's been exciting to see some of our original projects start to come about more. And we've shipped games on mobile, PC. We did Android TVs, XR. We had a brief moment where we were working on a Google Stadia project. And so we've bounced around between a bunch of different platforms, and we really got our start in mobile. So what I'm going to talk about today is kind of what got Petricore here to where we decided to switch to XR. Why I think studios and indies should consider new markets. And also really important off of that is how to do it. And I think this is going to be the kind of crux of the talk is how did we go about when we were first saying, hey, let's pivot into XR? How did we come to that decision in the first place? And then as we went about doing that, how did we effectively navigate transitioning to that to the point where we're able to get Meta to support a project of ours? And I'll end with Q&A, hopefully, if I'm timely with this. I'll keep an eye on the time. Quick disclaimer, so again, this is really heavily based on like my experience and opinions. So I always like to say, please take everything I say with a grain of salt. Ask someone else what they think about this. There's someone somewhere in the world who will disagree with me on pretty much everything I say. So this is not right for everyone as well, and it's definitely focused around smaller studios, indies, teams that are just starting, or teams that maybe are struggling a bit in an existing space and trying to figure out what they do next, right? That was the situation that we were in, and so this is more applicable to that than if you're in the audience and you're running you're CEO of EA, which I don't see here. Seth Sivak always says this as part of his talks, and I love it, and so I'll echo it here, but he always says, consider this just tools for your toolbox. If one or two things that I say tonight particularly resonate and are useful, great. With that being said, so Petricore history, I'll give a quick what we did. So when we started, we were doing mobile games, and we put out a bunch of small mobile games, and we had various success with that. We were featured, our first game was featured on the front page of the App Store. It was a little puzzle game called Mind the Arrow. It's particularly near and dear to my heart because I got to do a good bit of the art for it. As you can see, it's the top left. My style was pretty simplistic. That was about as far as I could push it. We now have an art director who's much more talented than me. But we did those, and that game actually got featured by Apple a few times. It got put out on their social media channels. It was great for us as an initial bump as a studio. It made no money. We made like a few $1,000s from that game. We had no idea how to monetize a mobile game. And we got incrementally better each time, I can say. We shipped a few mobile games. Each did about twice as good as the others that came before. But we just found we were banging our heads against the wall in the mobile space. So we then decided that we wanted to switch to PC, and we started doing a bunch of different PC games. We worked on this game, Operation Dogfight, for a long time, way longer than we should have. And we went around and we pitched it, and I met with tons of different publishers, and everybody was always really nice and was like, oh, it's super cute, I love it. And that was usually where the conversation would end. I'd never hear back from them, couldn't get anyone to play a build. There was a lot of red flags that we should have seen as, maybe we shouldn't continue to pour time into this game. We did a smaller game, Battle Billiards. That was the Google Stadia game. That was a game jam that we did that we were one of the winners of. And it was a billiards game where you'd both go at the same time, and it was just like chaos. Obviously, Stadia didn't work out, and we ended up shipping on Steam just because we had the game mostly complete. And then we worked with Dejaban Games, also here in Worcester, here in Boston. And we worked on Remastered with Ichiro over there. And it was a really great experience for us because we'd never done original co-dev with a studio before. But again, none of those games did particularly well. So alongside that, we started doing client work. We basically, since we started in 2015, we've been doing client work since then. And we started through a mixture of luck and interest, finding a lot of work, client work in the XR space. So we did like a Mitsubishi showroom where you could like point at the car and you'd see the insides. We did this really cool, the GIF is like a idea for a kid's book that would come to life with AR. And we did like 10 other AR client projects that I didn't include here. We started doing all this and we were like, why are we doing client work that's really cutting edge and making PC games on Steam that aren't making any money? Why don't we better align what we're doing as a studio? And so we started working on smaller XR games. We did this, we actually got some funding from Snapchat to do a Lens Studio Snapchat-based augmented reality game where it was you would scan your room and it would turn into a crime scene and you would investigate it as a detective in AR. But you did everything through the phone, and we found that that wasn't as compelling. A lot of people wanted to like reach out and touch the stuff in their room, but they couldn't because it was through the phone. And we also did this other game, Capsule Critters, that we put on the Apple Vision Pro, and we've since ported to HTC, Pico, and Meta. Which then led us to our current project, which is a game called Mythic Realms. It's a mixed reality role-playing game that basically turns your room into dungeons that you go on adventures in. It's, we're calling it hybrid reality. It's a mix of VR and AR. So in augmented reality or mixed reality, you go out on these adventures in your room, and you're fighting monsters, and you're collecting resources that are in your space. So we try to blend your real room with this like virtual world. And then you're bringing what you gather from their roguelite encounters back to VR, where you're building up this kingdom over time, and that's how you craft gear and become more powerful. And there's a bunch of different biomes that you adventure through, and each ends with like a really epic boss fight. It's currently available for pre-order on Quest and coming out later this year. I'll have the QR code again at the end, but if anyone has a Meta Quest device, it'll work on 2 Pro, 3, and now 3S that's out. That's really impressive, and you should go buy it. But yeah, so that's us and what we're working on. So now for the talk. So the problem, as I see, is most indie devs are building in highly competitive markets. Steam, and to a lesser extent mobile now, but a lot of people are building for PC and Steam. And I think there's a variety of reasons for this. One, it's easier to build like a PC game than to try to build an XR project, right? Like there's a lot of hurdles and technical problems to deal with in an emergent space. I think another like huge part of it, and there's like both in a very important part of it, is passion. Like people, if you like playing PC games, if you grew up playing PC games, you're more likely to want to make that because it's what you've loved and what you like playing. And there's definitely a more willingness to embrace new platforms among younger people who grew up with those platforms and it's what they're familiar with. There's a larger audience. So like it makes sense from a business decision when you look at the audience of who's gonna buy your game. Like there's a lot more people that are playing PC games than they're playing XR games, or like an even more emergent space, right? And others are doing it too. I think there's a bit of peer pressure with other studios as you'll see other people are all working on these things. And as you grow your network and you meet others that are also building PC games, it's easier to kind of connect with them and try to build similar projects. And I think as a result, sometimes, especially for us as a studio, we viewed our switch from mobile to PC as safe. We were really nervous to go into VR at the time. Even though we were doing Google Cardboard and Oculus DK2 work, we were nervous to take the plunge in VR because we thought it was tremendously risky and unsafe. And we felt like PC was safe because of the things that I listed above. And my belief is it is not safer. It is just as risky. It's incredibly competitive. And for us, it was actually safer to pivot to XR. And I think the primary reason for this is if like there's a business principle, it's red ocean versus blue ocean strategy. And basically in summary what it is like a red ocean market, it's like it says here, it's cutthroat competition, it's really saturated. I like this example because it's both fish and boats. So, you know, there's more fish in a red ocean than there is in a blue ocean space for sure, right? Like there's more people in PC than there are in XR for our case. But there's also way more boats in the ocean competing for all those fish. There's less in XR, and that was part of us when we were looking, among other reasons, why we were particularly interested. A blue ocean market has less users and it's a lot less mature, but you have a lot more of an opportunity to capture those users and become more of a dominant force in the market. So why did we go XR? Part of it was, like I mentioned, struggling visibility and scattered work. So we were bouncing between different things. We were doing mobile and PC, and like we didn't have a unified knowledge set in the studio. We were like sending one person to go do one thing and another to do a wildly different thing. We were lacking a studio differentiator. Like this is a big thing I think for a lot of indies, is like, why are you different than anyone else? What sets you apart? How are you special? And it's a question like we're still searching for and trying to answer ourselves. Is, you know, like it's a constant thing that we're working on and refining. But for us, going into XR helped set us apart from a lot of other, like at the time our pitch was like, hey, we're making indie games and they're kind of cute and like they're family friendly, and like, you know, like it was a pitch that a million other people had. Now we have still a, you know, I'd say a maybe a more straightforward pitch for even XR, but at least there's less people that we're competing with directly. We have a high technical competence as a team. Definitely one of our strengths is we're engineering heavy, but like really good engineers. And they also are really hacky, sort of enjoy prototyping and figuring things out. And so we also had the XR experience. Like it was a natural fit for us. We saw opportunities via research that we did, and this is what I'm going to really dig into, is like, how did we do that? But as we talked to more people and as we looked at things, we just saw opportunities in the space. And last, like, it's still really important, it interested and excited us, right? We were not really that excited about VR, but as we started to see pass-through in the Quest 2 and like the emergence of mixed reality in these devices, that was exciting to us. We saw a lot of opportunity there to do stuff that just hadn't been done yet. And part of it was like, we were talking a lot as a studio about when the iPhone came out. Like, as you can see here, mobile is the predominant market in games, right? Like it really blew up, and when iPhones came out, there were a lot of people who were very early adopters to that ecosystem who did quite well because they were there very early, right? And so we kept talking a lot about, well, we want to try to find the next iPhone. And I think like this is something like a lot of studios do, is like, well, what's like the next big market that we can get into, that we can stand out? And for us, we were just doing a lot of research around that, trying to figure out, all right, like what is the next big space? And you can see, it obviously, like, new players come about over time that take another significant chunk of the games industry. And for us, that was like, we were confident that XR could do that. Now, I think with XR, it's really interesting. Like I had to highlight, you know, like most people I think are really familiar with stories like this, because I think the headlines are usually pretty attention grabbing in terms of the amount of money that Meta invests into reality labs. You know, I think there's two ways to look at it. We're more optimistic about the fact that they're willing to invest the amount of money that they are into this ecosystem. It's part of why they're the predominant leader in the space. Honestly, it's why this space even exists to begin with, is that they're willing to foot the bill for this. And I think you've seen markers along the way, like the transition from Facebook to Meta, that, their acquisition of Oculus, and a lot of what they're doing currently with like Orion that they just announced, and the Meta Ray-Ban glasses that sell quite well. Like, it's a strategy for the company, and we don't see them pulling back from this. And so, you know, when we see this, it's actually for us, you know, kind of like, they're not losing this money. Like, Mark doesn't back up a pickup truck full of cash into a pit and light it on fire. Like, it doesn't disappear to nowhere, right? It's what's funding projects like the work that we're doing and the other people in the platform. So I think that it's important to consider that with this, because there's a lot of other, you know, news as we started digging more beyond the surface level, like how are just sort of typical games press covering some of this stuff. And you can see that there's actually like so the VR market's larger than perceived. So for 2 years, Meta actually sold more headsets than Xboxes were sold. Like, the amount of headsets that are out there is surprising. It is a big ecosystem. And the other thing is, I don't know, like, Gorilla Tag, how many people are even really familiar with that? It is like an insane success story. Like, it was a person who worked part-time at an HR company who built this on the side. You would look at this on surface level for the visuals and be like, what is this? But they have had 10 million players, they have 1 million daily active users, and it's made over $100 million on the Quest store. There's another game called Meeps that's also Yeeps is very successful, similar. And there's a ton of other games that have done over 10 million in sales for the relatively small amount of players that there are. And I wouldn't just focus on, like, Gorilla Tag is the most successful. Like, it's easy to get hung up on that. But I wanted to call it out because a lot of people aren't aware that something like that even exists in VR and that it's not like this dead market, right? So this isn't just about XR, and I don't want to just kind of keep talking about why you should do XR. It's actually more broadly about just why you should consider any emergent platform in general. So it's not just a plea for XR. I really like the principle of trying to be ready to catch a wave when it's coming versus trying to like run out and chase it when it's already there. And I think like that's something that we see a lot of, is this like trend chasing, is like something very popular so everybody's going to jump on it. And I think that that isn't, you know, there's always people who are pre-set up for when that change comes. And if you're in that position, you're in a very advantageous spot because you're very early. And if it blows up, you were one of the first few who were there. And for us, that was, we saw mixed reality. Like, we started building Mythic Realms when we could start just prototyping on a Quest 2. We were making a lot of assumptions, like Apple Vision Pro was a very speculative thing that people were saying they were just going to cancel. It was unclear what Quest 3 was really going to have mixed reality capabilities wise, but we were taking a lot of what we learned from mobile AR and what we were starting to assume about what would happen, and we were applying it to like looking ahead at what was happening there. So again, this isn't really about chasing trends, it's about trying to do research to understand what's coming in the future and how you can set yourself up for when that wave does come. But how do you do that? So one of the things that we look at is there's this chart, the diffusion of innovation. And I really like this. It basically breaks up users into a few different buckets. There's the innovators, and these are the people who did like day one go out and buy an Apple Vision Pro, right? Like I think most people kind of laughed at that when it came out. It's very expensive and it's a clunky device, and there was like some interest, but there was a small subset of people that are like in it hard, and they're the early people that are willing to deal with things that are rough. They're the people who like backed the Oculus Kickstarter when it first came out, right? Like, not everybody's gonna go do that, but they're willing to deal with those hiccups. And then you have early adopters, and these are the people who kind of follow that. They're willing to try it after some of these people, maybe once it's a little more refined. The chasm is really the hardest thing to cross. That is like going from this sort of early market niche thing that people are willing to deal with the problems into like an early majority, late majority, like that's where you have a more mass market product. And then you have the laggards, and those are like the people who like still have a flip phone, right? Like it's just like, it's really hard to reach those people. They will only convert when they are forced to. And so it's a way to look at technology and try to understand like where is that platform at currently and when's a good time to join. Being an innovator is really like the opportune time to be, because you can be really early in that space, but you also want to make sure you're not too early. And I'll talk about that in a second. But because like, let's face it, like, I mean, I mentioned we did a Google Stadia project. We also have Bose AR on there that we also did for their glasses that sadly no longer exist. But, you know, there's a bunch of other, like Ouya, I distinctly remember. And like, there is a ton of different platforms that have come out and come and gone, and they all, you know, failed for one reason or another. You know, Fig was going to really like change how like invest in games, and obviously like that, you know, like it was successful in some ways, but it didn't really, you know, change that model. And so there's, you know, a lot of stuff that's come and gone where people have gotten particularly excited about it, and then it's fizzled. I don't know if anyone was, actually I did meet someone at a conference who was working on a television network exclusively for 3D TVs, and that he said that was like the quickest he was ever at a company that like both raised a bunch of money and went out of business really quickly. So how do you evaluate and like start in a new space, right? I think these are the questions that are really important to ask yourself if you're looking at any particular space, right? The most important thing I think anyone can understand is like, where does money come from in this space? Like, who is putting money into this, right? Like, I think that's something a lot of people don't always initially think about. Like, it's easy to get lulled into the coolness of the tech, but it's important to understand like who's investing in it and why, because you want to know those people. Why are they investing is the other important part of this, right? Like, what do they particularly see? So for Meta, right, like, why do they care about the metaverse? Like, what is that, right? so like, if you think about it, the keys to the internet are really controlled by a few companies. It's Google, it's Microsoft, it's Apple, and like AWS and Amazon to some extent, right? Like it's a very few subset of people that control the web browsers and how we access the internet. Meta particularly sees like the metaverse and these XR devices as like the next form of computing, like it's spatial computing, right? It's like the new way that we interact with the virtual world. And so for Meta, it's like their opportunity to control this new ecosystem that they see as an emergent space. It's their ability to compete toe-to-toe with these other big tech companies. Mark didn't sell Meta. He continues to grow it, and like that's how they'll be able to grow and compete with the bigger players like Microsoft and Google. So it's important to like think about that, who you're competing with. So like who's already in it and what are they already doing? Are you entering a space where there are already like predominant players? There are already big XR studios that we're competing with. What is possible today and also what's possible in a few years. What we were pitching for Mythic Realms at the time, some of it was not in the SDKs or available to us. We were making assumptions that some of those things were going to be added over time. And that was based on research and leaks and rumors and like getting, being at a conference where someone from said company may have had a few too many drinks and was willing to let loose what was coming. So it's important that you do some research and understand, where is it at, but if you're gonna work in emergent space, like what's possible in that space in the future and how can you pitch to that? It's also important to understand like what's holding it back. Like why is it not an iPhone that's in everyone's pocket? Like, why is it not this big space yet? And really, like, think about that. And then the most important thing is, like, is that solvable in 5 years? This is that, like, are you too early in a space? Like, there's, I've talked to people like BCI, like brain-computer interface tech. Like, it's really cool, right? Like, there's interesting stuff happening in that space. Would I build a game assuming that those are going to be in every household, or at least, like, even, like, 2% of households in the next 5 years? Nah, not really. I think that the technology will eventually happen, but there's a lot holding it back from being this like market that you really could build in. And you'll see this too, like if you think about streaming, there were a lot of companies before Google Stadia that came and failed. Like Google Stadia was not the first to do game streaming and fail. Each one furthered the technology a little bit. It just wasn't ready yet. They went under. Someone bought up all the patents. They tried it again, and they kept doing that, and it's like this cyclical thing. And eventually, it all lines up, and it's able to actually work. And if you can understand what is holding it back currently, and at the time it was like, the bandwidth on the internet, and like there was things that was just made streaming really hard. So once you understand all those things and you ask those questions and just talk about them, I think the way that you start to pursue this then is through three things. It's research, prototypes, and networking. And I'm going to go into all three. But I also want to mention there's this other chart that we look at, and it's how you can evaluate where a particular piece of technology is at. It's the Gartner hype cycle, and this isn't like a rule of law, obviously. Like some companies, it's a little different. But they operate under like, there's the technology trigger, it's really new, it's really emergent, it's like just in research and development, and then it starts to go up in hype. Like I think everyone here can think of a few pieces of technology that have gone through this, like NFTs and crypto and AI, like everything kind of goes through this like, oh my God, everybody's all of a sudden like, you can't escape the gravitational pull of this thing. Like everybody's talking about it. And the promise of what this technology can do just reaches peaks that like are not feasible. But money keeps getting poured into it because everybody's excited. And it reaches that peak of inflated expectations where it's just like, all right, you've reached the vortex. I like how negative press begins as like at the, like, I think that starts like at the start. But like that's when it definitely skews more negative. And then you start to see it collapse. Like you start to see a lot of businesses close, startups that had gotten funded fall apart, and it just sort of collapses, right? But then eventually there are some useful use cases. Like I think of NFTs for this as like, obviously like a lot of NFT like game stuff got funded. But I still wasn't really confident that that was a particularly great use case for that technology. I don't think that that means that that technology is like dead in the water and couldn't apply to some other business though. So there's definitely like other places where those were being applied. And those will eventually grow, and you will find that that was an actual useful piece of technology in a different space other than games. But games got a bunch of it, and there was a bunch of other markets that got it. And so, again, it starts to go back up again, slowly over time. You start to understand the technology better, and eventually it ends up this thing that's just like, oh yeah, here's this space all of a sudden that. So that's something that we're always looking at, and when we were looking at XR, we were trying to figure out, right, where is this? Like, where do we think? I think it had already gone through the peak of inflated expectations a few times, and so we felt like it was finally at a point where it was starting to level off. So the first part, research. I think start with everything, like everything that you're excited in. What we did as a studio is we have our like level of care circles. And these are like 3 concentric circles that you just talk about every piece of technology that you are interested in as a studio. So you're interested in Web3, 5G, crypto, whatever, right? Like you don't need to do all of it. You're just gonna write down every piece of technology that you can think of as a studio that you're like loosely like, we should just keep a close eye on this. And you bucket it into 3 categories. There's keep an eye on, there's interesting in experiments, and then there's like core known capabilities to the studio. And you can move those things in and out. But the idea and how we approached this was, we just looked at everything and then we said, all right, these are the things like, we're not gonna do anything with these. Like it's not ready yet, we don't have confidence in it. Like we had, NFTs on there. Like we weren't really confident in that. We weren't gonna try to pursue that. We weren't gonna do research and development into that. So we kept that in the keep an eye on. Like, yeah, we'll keep a cursory eye on this space, but we're not gonna invest our own time and money into it. And then you have investing and experiments. And so for that, that's us like, okay, we're keeping more of an eye on this. Like we're willing to actually like prototype these things, and we're interested in them beyond just at a surface level, let's keep an eye on it. And then lastly, like core known capabilities is, all right, we've done enough prototyping and we've done some projects in this, we've really gotten this under our belt. It is like a core competency of the studio. We're willing to call it something that like we hang our hat on. And so we move things between that. As a part of it, we have built into the studio, part of our like all hands sprint planning is we did a weekly article sharing, and I found this really helpful. Everybody had to bring one piece of news on any emergent tech. And it could be like a tweet, it could be like a Reddit article. People found like research papers. People found, like I tend to gravitate towards more like business press. But it was so great because it was like engineers and artists and everyone was bringing stuff that like related to them. And we would discuss it as a team. Like we would dedicate 30 minutes to just talking about these things. And we got so much smarter as a group as a result. Like it was amazing because we all just kept bringing really cool stuff together and talking about it. And it wasn't just XR, but it was really like gravitating towards that. The other benefit, as a studio, I'd say, was as a result of this mandatory article sharing, everybody just started subscribing to like XR Press and things that, one, I wanted everybody to be reading because we were gonna be doing this. And so it was really helpful from, all right, like we're all just like looking at this stuff all the time now, and people who otherwise may have been just sort of somewhat interested, we're now subscribed to more of the articles and newsletters, and we're paying more attention to it. And we were, we just kept talking about it a lot. So from the research side, like definitely answer those questions and then spend some time digging a bit deeper into this. I found the article sharing to be a great way to do that, but there's like other ways that you could foster that discussion on the team. Next is prototypes. So I found this off to the side, which I don't even know if you can, maybe. So what it is essentially we put together a doc where we were just like, okay, we're gonna do prototypes across different technologies. How are we gonna handle those? Like what are we doing and what are the goals of us doing that? And if you can't read here, like it was drive new business. Ryan can share clips of experiments on social media, post on our website, educate Petricore devs further on AR, can be released in a live application, push the boundaries of AR, do unique and interesting things. Like we had clear goals that we set for why we were doing these. I think it's important, like small and like time box your prototypes. Like do not be like, all right, we're gonna like try to make an XR. Like we did not build a fully like mixed reality role-playing game as our first XR game. Like Mythic Realms is like 12 prototypes in, right? Like it each got incrementally a little bigger, but you can't start with something huge as a prototype. Like it has to be a very quick, learn as much as you can in a short period of time. You want to have clear goals and success, like I mentioned with this. I think that is tremendously important. You need to understand, why are you doing this and what do you want to get out of it? Like, what are your goals of building this prototype? Why are you bothering to do it? And for us, like, we outlined those, right? We just talked as a group of like, what do we want to get out of this, and looked at like what's good for the studio. To me, it's really important, like the question we always ask ourselves before we do any XR project, and I think this applies to any emergent tech that you're going to do, is, can this only be done with X/Y technology? Like, does this use the technology in such a compelling way that it makes sense that it's on this? It's not just, hey, we're taking like a flat screen game and slamming it onto a table, and it's just like this thing that like you could play on your computer and it would be more fun and more interesting on a computer, frankly, right? Like Mythic Realms, one of the big parts of it was like the combat like uses the room, stuff crawls over your furniture, and like I was just recording a bunch yesterday for an Airbnb that we booked to get footage for a trailer, and like I was jumping on the couch and like you could like fire arrows from it, like I could hide behind stuff. Like it's a very physical game. You couldn't do that in VR. You would kill yourself. So it's really important that for like mixed reality, like it was core to the experience, is like you can run around and do these things. Like it's something you couldn't really do in anything else. And so that was important for us. And so I think for any like prototype that you're doing, it's important to think about that as, you know, if it's a game and some other technology or ecosystem, is it something that could only be done with that, or it's lacking in that ecosystem, it's unique in some way? And release it. That's the most, honestly, like that's the most, like we made some really rough prototypes, but we always tried to get them out there. Like, and for us, there was stuff that we put out that I would have been honest, like we would not have had the highest hopes that it would have been this tremendously successful experiment, but we were pleasantly surprised more often than not by it. And so like an example from that is we worked on this game, Capsule Critters, I had earlier. We put that out on Apple Vision Pro as a way to build something small that we could understand better how Vision Pro worked. And so for that, we built this game. It was like, if anyone's familiar with Suika, like the watermelon game, we built a 3D version of that. And we wanted it, though, to use eye tracking. We wanted it to use hand tracking and to use a lot of the strength of what Vision Pro could offer. And we also wanted it to be, they have different styles of experiences, but it was intentionally a really small game that you could play, because the strength of Vision Pro is it's a multitasking device. It's not like, you know, it's not a singular VR do one thing. It's a, hey, I want to put a screen over there and I want to fiddle with this thing over here and have this other thing up on the wall. Like, that's what's cool about the device. So we leaned into that and we built a small game you could play while you were watching, you know, a Disney Plus thing on your 100+ screen, you know, display. So we built that, and truthfully, like, we didn't really expect it to like sell any units or to do that much with it beyond just sort of learn Vision Pro and put it out. But we put it out and we had this idea, well, let's like go to the other platforms that are adding like eye tracking and hand tracking and mixed reality features more robustly. Like maybe they want something small. And we had a really good hit ratio of getting a lot of other platforms to, one, get us devices so that we could test and bring it, but two, also like fund the development of bringing it to their ecosystems, which was great for us. Like we didn't really expect that this was going to be a huge success for us. We actually were able to like get a decent amount of money to port it to other platforms, and I think like that for us was a huge success. And so I think it's like you can put these out and you can be pleasantly surprised by the results that they might bring you. The last part of it's networking, the thing that everybody loves. Although you're all here, so you must have, like, to some level, be well, you know, you'll bear through it. You know, I think to me, and again, I run the business and I handle a lot of the business side of it, so like the networking side appeals the most to me. You need to build a bigger bubble. Like we all live in bubbles of our own making, especially like with technology and social media. Like we really prune who we like spend our time with and look at what people are saying now. And if you're in like an ecosystem where people aren't really talking about the technology or space that you're building in, you're gonna miss a lot of opportunities and just like, what are people doing in this space? Like you need those people in your general vicinity because they're gonna be talking about this stuff and you can learn a lot from them. And so you need to broaden who you're actively engaging with. So it's really important that you go then to events specific to whatever technology you're building in. And there's going to be some, like there's always something out there for whatever it is that you're building, or you're so early that it doesn't exist, and that might be a sign that maybe you're too early. But when it came to XR, there's AWE that has multiple locations, the Augmented World Expo. Meta and Snapchat both have dev events that they put on focused around that. Like, there's plenty of events that I make sure to get out to. GDC has a whole extended realities XR component to it. And so, like, we pursue a lot of the XR specific events and get to know people in those spaces. Because it's where you're gonna learn about opportunities. Like, I think there's 3 parts to this. One is you'll learn about opportunities in the space. When we were pitching Mythic Realms, actually it was pure luck that I was introduced to the person that would fund that experience, because I was meeting people at events and just happened to meet the right person who was like, hey, you're doing all these experiments. Like, I actually know the person who's like funding all the mixed reality stuff. Would you like to talk to them? And also, as a matter of fact, they are doing some stuff and so it was just this opportunity of like, I learn these things through being at events and just talking to people, right? Like, you bounce around, you talk to people, you learn all these things. You'll also get like the real talk at these events, like, especially when you're in an emergent space like XR. There's a lot of like BS or like tech demo video things that are all faked that like, and if you're just sort of starting in it, it's easy to see those things and be like, oh my gosh, wow, like I can't believe this crazy stuff is all possible. But then when you actually put the device on, you're like, wait a second, hold on, like this wasn't the video. And so it's like important that when you're at these events, you'll hear what people are saying. Like, the engineers who worked on some of these things will be there. And if they don't seem very thrilled with what they're showing, or when you ask them about the future of this and they sigh and go, yeah, there's probably some signs that something might be wrong there. And so I really like at conferences, you get like the real, like behind the scenes, what did the people actually working on this stuff think? And you'll also be dumb. Like, that I think is one of my favorite things about events is when the first event that you go to in this space, regardless of how much research you've done, you are gonna end up in a conversation with someone where you are completely in over your head. And I think like, hopefully everyone here has had that experience at some point with someone. But at least for me, like the first XR event I went to, I thought I knew about, and like I ended up talking to some really smart people who I was like, I gotta really brush up and learn some more about what we're doing here. And so I think it's important for that, because you're going to end up in these conversations and you'll just hear how people extremely knowledgeable about this stuff talk to each other, even if you're just a fly on the wall listening. And like, that is so important and great to see how those interactions happen, because you can try to build yourself to that level. You're going to start out at these events and like just be a sponge, like absorb everything you possibly can, learn as much as you can from all the people who are there, with the goal of becoming a whale. I say a whale because like they're really big and everybody notices them, and everybody's really happy to see a whale whenever they're out. So those are the important, you want to be a whale. So there's always those people at conferences, like the people who've been in it forever and everybody seems to know them. Like, that didn't happen overnight, right? Like, you want to become that person if you're really invested in this space, and it just takes time and showing up to things. So a final note. That same advisor, Monty Sharma, gave me a really great example when we were planning for the studio, and it was a hurricane map. And so, like, when you see the cone for a hurricane where it's going, it really has like a number of paths that it could take at any given time. Like, they have a vague understanding of like a hurricane's heading in this direction, but it could curve up and it could go and end up in North Carolina, or it could veer off to Houston, right? Like, you don't really know, the cone of where you're heading, you're going in a direction, but you don't know exactly where you're gonna land. And I think when you're working in an emergent technology, there's a bit of that to it. Like, there is, there is always that level of uncertainty for where you're going. And I think that's something that's just innate to anything that you're working on, but particularly in an emergent space, you'll do the best with the information you have, but things will change. It's also okay to walk away and pivot. Like, I think that that's the other important part of this is regardless of how invested we as a studio are in XR, we always keep like one foot just like ready to jump out, because it just hasn't really hit that full blown, like we're launching a big mixed reality game, but there's not a lot of them. And so we really don't know how we're gonna do. Like we're looking at some others that came out and we're like, okay, you know, we're a little nervous. But it's also like a huge opportunity, because I think like it's so early and there's just this willingness to keep taking at bats and figure out how to do it. Like we already have another project that's ready to go. And so I think like that's really rare for this technology, but it's because we've shown that we're competent in how to build for it. And how you can curtail some of that, you know, okay to walk away, what are we doing, is have some time maintaining R&D exercises of like, what else is coming, what else is there, like, don't pick one thing and then stop everything else like looking ahead. We still do the article sharing and we still talk about tech other than XR. And it's just because like we would just want to keep an eye on what else is going on. Like if overnight Meta's like, you know what, we shut down Reality Labs, good luck everyone. We would not be the only ones scrambling, but there would, you know, obviously it would be good to know what we're gonna do next. And so we just keep an eye on things to see what else is coming, right? It still has to be a fun game. Like this is the other important part, like there's no getting around that, unfortunately. And so, you know, at the end of the day, it has to be something compelling people want to play. It has to be a fun game. Like regardless of what platform you're building it on, like game development is still game development. People play games to have fun. And so that's just like an important thing to keep in mind. And the last part is I've been very focused on building for emerging platforms. I will add the note that of course, you can still build a game on Steam. You can still launch a mobile game. You can still even put, I said think outside the Xbox, so I'll end with Xbox. You can still put something out on Xbox that does tremendously well. And so obviously like there's this, I'm not saying this as a, hey, everybody should stop working on these platforms and do other things. You can still put stuff out. People continue to do tremendously well. I think something to keep in mind with that though is in kind of the general idea of this talk, what's unique about it? Why would someone want to come to whatever it is that you're building in those existing markets that's different than what else already exists in that market? It's a really hard problem to solve because there's so much stuff, and it's why we went into a different space. So on that note, thank you again everyone for listening. Mythic Realms is available for pre-order. That's my code to connect on LinkedIn. I have my email as well if anybody wants to chat, and I'll hang around for a bit and answer any questions. But thank you for listening to my talk.
Chris. Can you talk a little bit about trying to figure out what the limitations of a platform are? Like what's keeping it from really blowing up? Like what is it about XR that's preventing it from being everywhere? And it seems like they're selling well, but it's still like, I mean, no one's heard, maybe I am the only one, I haven't heard of Gorilla Tag. Why aren't these games exploding in the mainstream games press and everywhere? Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think some of the main things holding XR back are like the form factor of the devices is still very clunky. Like if the last device you tried was a Quest 2, which is probably the one that like most people are familiar with, like the 3 and 3S are a lot more comfortable. Like the jump in that quality is good. I think in a few more generations it's going to be very comfortable to wear these, and they keep getting them lighter. But I think like that's holding it back. Just like they look silly still, like people are kind of embarrassed by them. It messes up your hair. It's also like just not usable. Like like do certain hairstyles, and like there's just like certain parts of it that just like it's still a little emergent. I think part of it's also like it skews younger. Like Gorilla Tag's very popular with kids, and I think that's part of why it's a market that is popular in like a younger demographic, like very heavily. Because it's very physical, like kids really gravitate to it, and parents are okay with giving it to their kids because like they're like in Gorilla Tag it's very like you are a monkey and you move like this. So like they see their kids just like swinging their arms and flailing around, and they're like, okay, you know, fine, whatever. This is better than them just like sitting. So I think like that's part of it is why like people don't cover it as much as like, and I also think VR still like has to shake this like feeling that like that mainstream press does tend to feel like it's dead. Like it's weird because it isn't quite, but it's just got this like bad stigma, and I think part of it's the form factor, the clunkiness, the fact that it's more kid friendly.
But also like the price point needs to come down, and I think there needs to be more use cases besides games. Like in Supernatural, like that's really like people buy it for fitness. Like I talk to a lot of people who buy these for things other than games. So why we were excited about Vision Pro is because like there's more non-game use cases. But I think to me that's like these need to be useful beyond just like a game console. Which is all stuff that they're working on. Like Meta has a whole fund now just dedicated towards consumer applications that aren't games. Like it's the lifestyle incubator. And so like there's a lot of effort to just like build out an ecosystem beyond gaming. And I think like that's gonna help games because people will buy those to do other things like phones, but then still play the games. So yeah. Yeah.
So when designing prototypes that you use to build up to bigger projects, did features of these technologies you were working with inform the kinds of things you wanted to prototype, or was it more interesting things you found in research informing the design of these prototypes?
So it was a little bit of a mix of both. Like you're definitely constrained to what it can do at that time, to like some degree. Like you can force some things to work, but I think for us, like part of it was we were trying to strike a good balance between like what were some of the things we expected would be added versus what was currently possible. So like for Mythic Realms, when we did it, you had to physically map out the space yourself and all the furniture in the room. It was like this just awful process. Like no user, like, oh, to play this game, I have to like line up my walls and then map out all my furniture. Gee, I can't wait. Like it just sucked. And we were like, there's no way this is gonna, but we knew from mobile that Niantic and others had figured out how to map out your space without needing like LiDAR sensors, and like you could just do it with a camera through like different technology they had. So we were like, this is a solved problem that Meta will figure out. And so let's pitch a game that's going to use the room and need auto mapping. And like, even though they were like, oh, we can't say, like we knew they were gonna do that. So I think like that was something that we tried to factor in. And it was still possible to build that with the automated map it yourself, but we knew what was coming would make it much easier and more compelling for them as a pitch. For like design, it started with definitely like for us, like what did we think was cool and missing from the device? And RPGs and adventure games are really popular as a category. Mixed reality, most things are new for the first time. And you know, the one credit I could give them credit for a few things, but for Meta, it was very easy to talk to people there and be like, here's an idea that we have, what do you think? And they'd be very upfront about like, yeah, you should keep working on that, that's interesting. Or like, no, we have enough of those, stop. Like, you know, and so like, I think that was really helpful too, is like the early ideas of Mythic Realms, we had external validation. We got a grant to help with the prototype, and that to us was a clear sign to keep making it. We would not have continued to do it if it wasn't for that. And so I think like that was also the other thing we were looking for, was like prove that there was some external interest. Yeah.
Yeah, so my question is, when you were showing the like level of care circles, when do you decide to take something from just small investments and experimenting with it to bring it to looking for core features? Like, okay, I think this is something we should really invest in. When do you make that decision, and like, how did that decision come to be?
It's a mixture of things. Like I think it's answering all those questions for yourself and deciding like one is like, are you interested in it? That is a big part of it. The other part of it is like, okay, we see an opportunity there. Like for us was we caught wind of funds and that there was opportunity, right? And we were like, okay, we should consider building something to this. And we kept getting these indicators that it was like we were going in the right direction, like the right doors were opening for us, the right people would talk to us. And so it's not like it's definitely we move it into that and say, yes, we're gonna focus on it, but it's also a little bit of a slow process. Like I said, they can move in and out. So we moved it into the core, yes, we're gonna build the Mythic Realms prototype, but we could have moved it back out if we were like, yeah, they're not interested in this, and like this AI stuff seems to be cool, so why don't we do some stuff there, right? Like, I think that you can move them in and out. The important thing is to look for some external validation that it's worth continuing to pursue. Like we put out a demo as well, and we had a few thousand people play and leave good reviews. And so we were like, no, like the demo is terrible compared to like the game that we have now. So we're really hoping that people will like it. But it's like, I think for us, that was another one where like I talked to other people and it was like higher than other games that were out. And we were like, oh, like people seem interested in this. We should keep working on it. And like funding's there. We should keep doing it. Yeah.
Hey Ryan, thanks for being here. Really relate to some of the topics that you touched on. A lot of it, in tech startups, we kind of incorporate. I just wanted to know with indies, how can indies scale faster, and get to where they want to get, maybe in a smaller amount of time. I mean, you've been on your own journey for, I think now it's been 9 years with Petricore. And I've seen a lot of indies go alone on it for quite some amount of time, and then probably lose the opportunity in terms of what they want to bring out. So just wanted your opinion on that, and what's funding like for indies today?
So for the how they scale faster, I think one I can't particularly say because we haven't scaled really quickly. Like it's just not something that we've done. So I haven't been through that to say here's what we did. For people who I've seen, it's that they have done a really good job finding a niche that's underserved. Like I've seen people, I think Proletariat was a great example of this locally. Like they built a number of games, like they did Streamline, which was like very Twitch and streaming focused, and Seth gives an amazing talk at GDC about that. It didn't go well for them, as a little spoiler for the talk, but like what they were able to do out of that was like very impressive. And then they were able to pivot to Spellbreak, which had this really cool technology of being cross-platform, and like they brought some innovations to it. And I think that for the studios I've seen be able to scale up, and if you're going to go after like raising VC funds, like they're usually focused on some emergent space, or they've identified a specific underserved niche in an existing market like PC or mobile. For what is indie funding like right now, I'm not as optimistic because I still see a lot of downtrend, and it's really hard to get games funded. Like there was a really great Jason Della Rocca. He does a lot of. He's a Canadian, but he's still good, and he does a lot of like really good talks about business funding. And one of them I saw was like an example of just like what the pipeline from into a publisher to funding is. And it's like for every like 1,000+ games in, like 1 or 2 get funded. Like it's really like a tough. To even like get them to play the demo is hard, let alone to get them to fund you. And like it's very competitive, and that's why. Now for XR, it was a little easier to do that. Because there aren't as many people knocking at their doors as the more, solid spaces, right? Like for PC.
Just really quick, how long did you bootstrap?
How long do we bootstrap?
Yeah.
Oh, we still are bootstrapping. 9 years, yeah.
All right, thanks.
Justin?
So you talked about experiments and prototypes and following something, and the doors are opening, you're getting this positive feedback. I'm sure you also, being in an experimental space, I'm sure you also found technical challenges, headwinds, cultural, negative experiences as well. One of the questions I'm always fascinated by is, when do you choose to persist versus pivot? You can hear lots of excellent stories why it was good to do one versus the other on both sides. So how did it work for you? Like, how do you've mentioned, like, how do you do that decision about whether to persist on something where you're running into challenges versus pivot, and how do you balance that all out?
For us, it was a discussion because like there was a group of us, and so it took a long time. Like everything that I outlined here wasn't something that like day one we just implemented and started doing. Like it took years for us for like the ship to kind of change course. Now I think like we moved quicker than like a big AAA studio would, obviously, but like it's still, I don't think you can make a seismic change like that just overnight, tell everyone, hey, we're doing XR now, without like people seeing why we should be doing it. For us, why we moved away from PC was I just saw us, we kept coming up with ideas for games, but they weren't as unique and I knew they weren't going to stand out in the market, and it was easier for us to look at XR and go, okay, even if we have something that isn't the most like crazy hook, like unique game, we could rely more on the technology because we have a very tech-heavy team that could be very efficient with it and pitch something more in line with the cool ways that we'll use the tech. Now, I think like it's a little to our detriment, honestly. Like when we'll see when we ship Mythic Realms, I think we maybe lean a little too heavy in the like use the tech in every way. But I think like for us, that was why we were just looking, is like we just kept failing at making mobile and PC games. Like we were successful enough to like hang our hat on some stuff and say like, cool for the studio, we got Apple featuring, we're proud of like bits and pieces of it, but it never made enough money to like keep people working on it, and that was what we wanted. So we weren't meeting the goal that we had set, and we decided let's try something else to like still achieve that same goal. Yeah.
Because I spend a ton of time in VR. A bunch of friends who are like former PC VR. I wonder what reason seems like people think it's bad, because PC VR has been having a bad time. I don't know if you contemplated you do PC, you could also like XR capabilities, and there's like no, if it's not on beta standalone, forget about it. Like
I'm a big standalone or bust. Yeah, I think the convenience of it, like, there's definitely like a streaming from PC, like could be interesting, but like, yeah, I just think standalone's a lot more compelling for, like, and it's just been proven through Quest 2 sales. So like, there's definitely people trying. I know HTC just put out a device that like the attempt is to be, and some of them are saying like, oh, we're actually like seeing like people still playing PC and like they want more devices, but that to me feels a little still on the more niche side of like harder core enthusiasts looking for high-end rigs that can run really like visually impressive things. Quest seems to have the more mass market appeal, and that's like our game is very heavily in that bucket than like a PC VR game. Yeah, Jay.
So when you're doing a pitch deck on a game for like emerging technology, do you focus more on the aspect of like how the game would benefit the platform, or would you focus more on the game itself and like the team of the game and the gameplay of the game?
We did a bit of both. I think it's important to mention a bit for the platform. Like again, like this is another thing where you can do research. So actually, like I mentioned all about Quest selling a lot of units, and that's all true, right? But it's like not, it's an open like knowledge that the retention on the devices is where the weakness is. Like that's part of the problem. Is like people buy these. A bunch of people probably own VR devices that you haven't touched in a bit, and like that's like a concern with them. Is like we want stuff that keeps people coming back. And so when we were pitching, we leaned a bit more into that of like, hey, like we have, it's a longer experience and we want like people to come back and there'll be like daily rewards for, so like we leaned a bit into this will be a retentive game in terms of how we try to approach it, because we knew from articles and research and what we were seeing, like that was a problem that they had as a platform and they would want content that would solve that. But we had to still talk about the team. We talked about the Snapchat game we did, our other XR work for clients. We couldn't escape any of that by saying like how cool it would be for the platform. But definitely, I think especially in emergent tech, why, we were a group of, by that time we'd been around for a studio for several years. But I think especially even as like a student team, new platforms are particularly exciting because they're a lot more willing to work with people who are new to the industry. Especially if you're like a fan of that hardware. That's the other thing is like these established markets have like an old school kind of mafia of like people who've been in it forever and know all the, and it's like harder to crack into that. But if you're in a new market, it doesn't exist quite as much. And so I think like it was for us a little also, we were able to get access to people pretty high up the chain a lot quicker than I know we could have if we were doing a PC game. Yeah. Yeah.
When you say pitch, do you mean pitching to like Meta or like publishers, or like does Meta fund development of VR games?
They do. I can't say much more than that, but we were pitching publishers, we were pitching Meta, we were pitching all the platforms. So like there's also Pico, HTC, the Apple Vision Pro. Like we were pitching everyone that we knew had a platform that would fund stuff. And there are VR publishers, much smaller than like, PC publishing, like definitely, and a lot less. But we were able, again, like surprisingly, most of them, like the major VR publishers we had meetings lined up at GDC with, which is something, and like some of them came together pretty quick before GDC. You can't do that in like flat screen, like to that same extent. So like, I think for us, like, we pitched everyone that we could when we were trying to get funding and try to keep as many doors open as we could. And then the most advantageous is definitely with the platform at the moment, given the nature of like the uncertainty of mixed reality. I think if we were pitching a VR game, we could have potentially had an easier time with the publishing side. A lot of the feedback we had from them was game's cool, but like we don't know how mixed reality is gonna do. So like we're not ready to invest. Meanwhile, if you're looking at some of the platform holders, they're a little more willing to take that risk because they're building this tool set and they want examples out there that people can use to design around. Yeah.
I'm curious, are there other platforms coming out there you're excited about? Or if you had to pivot tomorrow, if Meta shut down for whatever reason, what would you switch to?
I'd cry in my office at home for a few weeks. And I'd say like, Apple has lower cost devices rumored. I mean, they're still going to be expensive because they're Apple. And I do not imagine Apple putting out a $300 headset. Like they'll do after like several generations of it, but they don't even do that really with phones that much anymore. Samsung has like an alleged device that they've been working on. What I'm particularly excited about, so I don't know, like if you don't follow XR, so Meta's really pivoting all of the technology that runs on Quest is now called Horizon OS, and it's an operating system that runs on these headsets. Their goal is now there will be other hardware manufacturers. They think they already have a deal with Lenovo, one of the other, Lenovo, I think. And they're going to manufacture headsets that run Horizon OS, not manufactured by Meta, but run on Meta operating system and have access to the same set of games. That to me is really exciting because that's like all of a sudden manufacturers can build devices. It's like Windows, right? Like it's like they can build hardware that runs on the same operating system, has access to the same tool sets. Now, like we're worried about the fragmentation, like it's all Android based and we made mobile games on Android, so we know how awful that can be. But like, I think it's more exciting for us, the opportunity of like, hey, they have like an operating system now that manufacturers are gonna build on. I mean, beyond that, we're particularly also interested in some of the glasses. I think they're pretty limited, but like X-Real has some really cool AR glasses. We're actually doing like a little prototype on that, and Qualcomm put out some glasses about a year or two ago. And I think like those have some limitations with them and they're kind of clunky, but like Snap Spectacles, Meta Orion that they announced, like there's cool stuff happening in smaller form factor glasses too. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on a game like Half-Life Alyx, which has shown the gaming community just how much is possible within VR and other technologies on that same realm?
All those like are the things I think really move it forward. I don't know how much of an impact Asgard's Wrath 2 really had, but like it did, I think from a games press side, pick up a lot of it. Like it got like, IGN gave it a 10 out of 10. Like it got like really great. It was like a VR game that's like 60 to 80 hours of gameplay that got like 10s across the board. And like, it like did quite well from a review side. I'm particularly excited about Batman coming out. Like I think that has a tremendous chance at just like, if that gets 10s and it's like, this is great, I think that that's gonna have a huge boost in 3Ss being sold, because those are at the $300 price point like the Quest 2 was. And like, I think Meta's really well positioned right now if Batman does really well. And I'm going to imagine that it will. So that one I'm particularly excited about. So I feel like those kinds of experiences help draw more people in, and they're willing to play like indie games like ours. So yeah.
So during the prototyping phase, while you're making an app,
how, with new form factors come kind of like new affordances for what's possible. How do you decide what maximizes fun within the new affordances? So like with, VR headsets, you can do hand tracking now, you can do all this stuff. How do you maximize fun for that form factor when you're choosing what game to develop?
It depends on the experience. Like I'm a big, like, I think hand tracking's great. Like, but I think for us, the type of game we were building, the haptics were really nice to have in the controller, and also access to the buttons for like menu navigation. Like we had some complexity that would have been hard to do all through hand tracking. So I think it depends on the experience. Like Capsule Critters is super simple, so we did hand tracking for that. And so for us, I think, like, I agree with the pitch that controllers will get phased out over time, and it'll really lean heavily into hand tracking with like controllers as an optional like purchase, just because of the fact that like it's cheaper to manufacture that, and also like they can distribute just the headsets at that cheaper price point, get more people in. Like Vision Pro didn't do controllers, right? So like, for us, it's a matter of like how many people are willing to engage with it. But for Mythic Realms, we were like enough people, and they're still shipping with controllers that that was a new piece of technology that we were excited about, but we were like, we don't need to support that for Mythic Realms because one, we're already doing so much with mixed reality and crazy stuff there. So like we didn't want to line up a million emergent things. I think that's the other with this stuff is like pick your battles. Like you don't want to do every new thing. But for us, that was like part of how we looked at it was like hand tracking's cool, not for this game, but for future stuff, definitely we should play with it still and be familiar. So yeah. Yeah.
I apologize, I was a little late. But when you're talking about player retention, your product is available in English. Can you partner with Meta to expand any of your player base to help with that retention? Is that part of your discussion right now?
Yeah, we did actually get it localized. It'll be out in eFigs, English, French, Italian, Spanish, and I think Japanese, Korean, and Chinese as well. So there was something where we were like, hey, we'd really like to localize it, and because it's an RPG that's very like inspired by like isekai anime is like part of, like they were like, oh, like this would probably do pretty well in Japan. Like there's a lot of headsets in Japan, so that was part of why they were like, yeah, we'll like localize it and let the Japanese store know that this is coming out. So we hope that it'll do well in other markets. The Capsule Critters game that we just put out, we put out in China, and it's done best in China. Like, it's fully localized in Chinese. Like they helped us with that. So yeah, it's like XR is a very global thing. So we're trying to make sure that we're hitting a lot of different markets. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone for coming. Of course, we'll be back right here next month on